Hard Times by Charles Dickens. In this PowerPoint presentation, we shall critically analyze the chapters of this novel. So let's start. Chapter 9 is titled as Siss's Progress, and here a conversation takes place between Sissy and Louisa. And Sissy tells Louisa that tells Louisa about her progress in school, that she's not at all doing well in school and how she's unable, to answer questions that are asked by Mr. Chocum Child. Now, the name Mr. Chocum Child is very significant here because if you look at the name, it has the word choke in it. Yes, literally, Mr. Chocum Child does not choke the children, the students, but the name has this ominous implication. Mr. Chocum Child, the schoolmaster, although literally he does not choke children, okay, but of course he chokes children with facts, and it shows the restricted nature. The name itself reflects that the nature of his approach is very much restricted. The way he teaches, the education that he imparts is a restricted one. So as I said, that he literally does not choke the child, choke the children, but he chokes their power of imagination. He chokes their creativity. He chokes their power of thinking. And that is why the name is very significant. And the way he, interacts in this chapter with Sissy Jupe, it also shows that how he, chokes children with factual knowledge. Sissy thinks that, she is stupid because she's unable to answer Mr. Chocum Child's questions. But here, in this chapter, when Sissy talks to Louisa, we get to see her sympathetic and sensitive nature, that how much sensitive she is. Now, the kind of questions that are asked by Mr. Chocum Child, she does answer them, but those answers are not factually correct, but those answers are sympathetic, and it shows Sissy's sensitive and sympathetic nature. In fact, her answers, portray her having a greater understanding of life. It simply portrays her having a greater understanding of life, greater understanding of the world. And here in this chapter, Louisa also asks her about her father, and she assures Sissy that she will not disclose anything to anybody. And then when Sissy is asked about her father and the circus, Sissy, although she is afraid to talk to Louisa or to disclose anything about her father, but she tells her that her father was a clown and recently his performances went down, so he left her behind for her good. And she also tells Louisa how one day she was asked by her father to buy a bottle of 9 oils, and when she came back with the oil, she found that her father was gone. But Sissy is sensitive, is reflected in her actions as well, that she is sensitive, because she has still kept that bottle of oil with her, because she believes that one day her father would definitely come back to her. He will return, and she's convinced. And after this conversation between Louisa and Sissy gets over, Sissy asks Mr. Gradgrind if he has received any letters about her father. And it is at this moment when we find Louisa and Sissy, sharing a very amiable bond with each other. And gradually this relationship develops in the novel. And when Sissy learns that Mr. Gradgrind has received no letter from her father, it disappoints her, but Louisa comforts her secretly and shares her disappointment. So in this chapter is significant because Sissy is depicted, although as a student in the school, Sissy does not make much progress as a student, but as an individual who has, you know, whose imagination, whose faculty of imagination is at work, who is able to think, who is able to imagine, is portrayed as someone knowing how the world works. While Louisa's factual education makes her completely unable to understand the relevance of Sissy's assessments, like the answers that she provides to Mr. Child's questions. She finds them sympathetic, she finds the answers sympathetic, but the relevance is not understood by Louisa, and it is all because of her factual upbringing. Because when we read this chapter and we find the answers that are given to Mr. Chokamchild by Sissy, shows that Sissy understands that human tragedy is something that we cannot be measured in numbers. And the wealth of a nation, like how much wealth a nation has, that hardly matters to Sissy. Why? Because if it is enjoyed only by a handful of people, if that wealth is controlled only by a handful of people, then that money is, means little or hardly has any importance to Sissy. So as far as Sissy is concerned, we can see that her knowledge seems to be greater. She is able to, look at things from a wider perspective. And here we see that how the education of fancy or education of imagination wins over the education of facts. Chapter 10 is titled as Stephen Blackpool. In this chapter, Stephen Blackpool, a very honorable, honest worker in Mr. Bunderbuy's factory, is introduced. He is 40 years old, and it is his, several years of hard work, struggle, labor that have taken a toll on his mental as well as physical health. And it is this impoverished state that affected him so badly that now people call him Old Stephen. Although he is 40 years old, he has stooped, his hair has also thinned and turned grey. Here Stephen's friendship with Rachel is revealed because after a day's work, after he is done with his work at the factory, Rachel is seen waiting for him, and then they meet and then they talk about life, they talk about their aging, and then they also talk about how his life in the factory is a muddle, because we will find that Stephen often describes a situation or his life as a muddle. Now, when he returns home, all of a sudden he finds that his wife has returned and she is in a completely drunken state. She's drunk to to such an extent that she's unable to sit up in her chair. And here, since she goes and sleeps on the bed, Stephen spends the night in a chair, and once he goes near her to cover her with a blanket, which shows his sympathetic nature. As far as Stephen's wife is concerned, the question that comes to our mind is that why she has become so, why she's given to drinking so much. It is because of the hardships of life, the hardships of working in the factory that, affected her to such an extent that she immersed herself completely in drinking. And herein lies the difference between her and Rachel. Rachel also works in the factory, but this, but her harsh experiences in the factory, her state, her poverty has failed to affect her inner goodness. And this is the the main difference that lies between Rachel and Stephen's wife. Now we know that even Stephen, he might have aged physically, but his these years of hardships have not affected him his have not affected his goodness. He has gone through the worst of things possible, but he is a man who complains very little. He doesn't have much to complain. And it is quite possible that when he began his work in the factory, he was a child. And Stephen does not, he doesn't even look forward to working anywhere else, which shows his commitment to work. And at the same time, that it is a kind of imprisonment that he has imposed upon himself. And it is also revealed that he doesn't have, skill at any other trade, and that's why he works in this. He has been, working in this factory for such a long time. As far as Stephen's relationship with his wife is concerned, he doesn't, he doesn't have, he no longer has any affection for her, but the condition she is in, it definitely, arouses his emotions, which again makes him appear as an affectionate, as a compassionate man. So now Stephen's wife has, turned out to be a woman who appears to be terrifying to him. So Rachel, in the same room, Rachel is also seen sitting, and she appears to be a sharp contrast to Stephen's wife. She is calm, she is quiet, and it is this, and it is Rachel's nature which would make any man fall in love with her. And it is, and it also explains why Stephen loves her, and why Stephen respects her so much, why Stephen has so much of affection for her. Because Rachel, as I said, the main difference between these two women is that Rachel has been also working in a factory, but her experiences have not contaminated her inner goodness, her inner being. Because here we find that Rachel is also compassionate towards Stephen's wife. Rachel does not doesn't have any bitter feeling towards Stephen's wife, which might be expected in such circumstances, because Stephen's relationship with his wife is strained, as it is reflected. And since Stephen and Rachel have a good relationship with each other, it is quite natural for a woman in like Rachel, to have bitter feeling towards Stephen's wife. But that is not the case with Rachel. And in one of the upcoming chapters, we shall get to see Rachel as a woman, what kind of a woman she is. Chapter 11 is titled as No Way Out, which is very appropriate because in this chapter, Stephen Blackpool pays a visit to Mr. Bounderby to get some help from him in order to get rid of his wedlock. And initially, he is praised by Mr. Bounderby because Stephen has always been a very honest worker. He has, always been very obedient, and he never created any trouble while working in the factory, and that's why he's praised. And but just when he's, told by Stephen that he wants to divorce his wife, he wants to get rid of his wife, immediately it angers Mr. Bounderby because Stephen knows it very well that as that wealthy people, rich people often got rid of their, marriage. They ended their marriage when it did not work. So Stephen explains the very situation he is in, that how that now his wife has become a constant drunk, and all of a sudden she leaves him for a long period of time, and then she again comes back. And for the last 5 years, now it is also explained by Stephen how for the last 5 years, he has been providing her with money to keep her away. But now again she is back, and now he wants to get rid of her. And the very moment this is heard by Mr. Bounderby, that Stephen wants to end his marriage, he is told that if he wants a divorce from his wife, he'll have to spend £1,500 in order to place his case to court and dissolve the marriage. And we, as readers, we know that it is beyond Stephen's capacity to spend £1,500, which means that it is not possible for him to fight a divorce case. So when it is told, so Stephen immediately questions, says that the situation he is in, that the situation is a muddle, and then he is rebuked by him. He is rebuked by Bounderby, for questioning the country's laws and institutions, and he tells him that initially he was praised now for not being a worker who looks for turtle soup, or who wants to drink turtle soup with a gold spoon, because these are all items of luxury. Okay, but now when he talks about getting a divorce from his wife, he is accused by Bounderby for being a worker who wants to, who wants turtle soup and venison and gold spoon, because these are items. Now, turtle soup is an expensive food, so this is something which could be afforded only by wealthy people. So this very conversation that takes place between Stephen and Bounderby immediately throws light that how divorce was a luxury which could be afforded only by the rich. And at the same time, this conversation shows that how during the Victorian period there were separate laws for the rich and the poor, and as far as poor people are concerned, their situation was that of hopelessness. They could not see any hope at all because they didn't have enough money to fight a case. So their life became, let's say, they had to continue living a life of unhappiness due to lack of money. So the class difference is also seen here, and it is immediately understood by Stephen. The difference between two classes, that the rich and the poor, that even the law is meant for serving the rich and not it is not meant for the poor. And here again Dickens satirizes, criticizes the laws of the time, that the political system of the time is also criticized by Dickens here. And as I had already discussed, that during this time period, divorce could get divorced, whether it is a woman or a man. One could get divorced only on grounds of adultery. And here, as far as Stephen is concerned, here we do not find Stephen, coming up with any such evidence. He doesn't even have any evidence of his wife's disloyalty, and neither the narrator here provides us with any such information that Stephen's wife is disloyal. So it becomes clear that it is actually money which stands as an obstacle to getting divorce for Stephen. It is actually money which stands as an obstacle because he doesn't have it. Moreover, we find that Bounderby, simply declines to offer any help to Stephen to come so that he could, to get him rid of his wedlock. And he talks about morality and religion, and immediately, passes moral judgment on him, against him, that how could he want to divorce his wife when he has married her? It is his duty to stay with his wife. He has this moral and religious obligation. So it is on these grounds of morality and religion that Bounderby forces Stephen to stay with his wife. Not only that, we also find that Bounderby says also rebukes Stephen. He says that he considers Stephen responsible for his wife's changed attitude. He says that perhaps he is only responsible for her decline, for her downfall. But but when it comes to rich people, when they want a divorce, when a man looks for a divorce, okay, and if he is rich, then this responsibility does not apply to him. Why? Just because he is rich, and because Stephen is poor, so he is held responsible by the wealthier class for the downfall of his wife. So as far as Stephen Blackpool is concerned, Stephen does not, as it is already mentioned in the beginning of the chapter when he is praised by Bounderby that he has never been a troublesome worker. So although he got paid, low, and the working conditions were not good, still Stephen never complained about his surroundings, about his life as such. But he's only, concerned about this terrible state of his marriage. He only complains about this marriage, which is completely useless. He's simply complaining about this burden that he has been carrying for so many years, because this marriage has become a burden for him, and so he wants to unburden himself. But then the only thing that is needed is money, which he does not have. So we find that money stands as the major or the primary obstacle to Stephen's freedom. This is the only, and therefore it appears that he would never be able to get out of this quagmire. Chapter 12 is titled as The Old Woman because in this chapter uh, a mysterious old woman appears who seems to be an acquaintance of Bounderby, and while Stephen was returning, from when he was actually outside Mr. Bounderby's office, suddenly he met this old woman who began to ask him several questions regarding Bounderbai's well-being, and which immediately implies the kind of questions that she asks Stephen Blackpool shows a kind of maternal concern, and it also indicates that she has a long-standing relationship with him. Now we know that Bounderby has been telling everyone that he has been abandoned by his mother, and he was brought up by his grandmother. So we don't even know whether this old woman is his mother or not. So, and she also informs Stephen that once a year she comes to meet Mr. Bounderby, and she simply watches him from afar, from distance. As far as Stephen is concerned, the kind of man, human being he is, he gives the answers. He answers to her queries very politely, and this woman kisses Stephen's hand when she comes to know that Stephen works in Mr. Bounderby's factory. So she simply kisses Stephen's hand, and then Stephen leaves. And in this chapter, Stephen also keeps on thinking about his marriage, and when he thinks that he has to leave this, he might have to leave this that as far as his marriage is concerned, he's stuck in it and he cannot escape it from it, because Mr. Bounderby has already refused to provide him with any kind of help in order to get out of this useless wedlock. So he keeps on thinking about his situation, about his wedlock, and it makes him kind of suffer from a feeling of guilt, because Rachel is in relationship with him and Rachel has not yet married. Now it is not made clear in the novel as to why Stephen did not marry Rachel, because they knew each other for many years. Okay, still Stephen did not marry Rachel. So it probably means that Stephen and Rachel had a very good friendship, but when he married his wife, at that point of time he loved her, and so he married her. But now when she has become a drunkard, when she has changed thoroughly, it is this very situation that has strained their relationship, and therefore it brought him close to Rachel. Although Stephen's here Stephen considers his wife to be a dead woman, which implies that he says that he is married to a dead woman, which implies that there was a time when he cared for his wife, when he married her, and that's why, despite knowing Rachel for so many years, he did not marry her. Why didn't he marry her? Which means that at that point of time when he married his wife, he was in love with her. But now this woman has thoroughly changed. She is no longer the woman who he loved. And now these years of drinking have actually made her an abusive, hateful creature who Stephen can no longer understand. She appears to be a complete stranger. So, as I said, that Stephen has this feeling of guilt, because since he's stuck in this quagmire, Stephen knows it very well that Rachel cannot marry him. And just as Stephen has aged, he is 40 years now, so is Rachel. She has also aged with time, and now she is beyond that opportunity to marry anyone else. She's no longer in that position to marry anyone else, because now she has also aged much as a woman, and this gives rise to this feeling of guilt in Stephen's mind. Chapter 13 is titled as Rachel because in this very chapter Dickens provides us with a clear picture of Rachel, what kind of a woman she is. And when we read this chapter, we find that she is simply depicted as an emblem of goodness, selflessness, and compassion. When Stephen returns home after meeting Bounderby, he finds that Rachel is there sitting next to the bed and she is taking care of his wife. And Rachel has decided to take care of his wife, which reflects the purity of her mind and her love and concern for Stephen, because Rachel knows it very well that Stephen's wife is the only obstacle between them, between her and Stephen. Despite this, she is very much concerned about her and she takes the responsibility of taking care of Stephen's wife. Because in this chapter she is, found, Stephen's wife is found wounded, but though it is not made clear whether the wounds that are there on her body, whether they are self-inflicted or not, or whether those wounds have been caused due to her alcohol-induced delirium. Maybe she was in a state of delirium, she met with an accident and which caused these wounds, but it is not made clear. But it is also, indicative that she might have tried to end her life, she might have tried to commit suicide. But in this very circumstance, the role that is played by Rachel is very important, because Rachel is in love with Stephen. Stephen and Rachel, they want to get married. So the only obstacle between them is Stephen's wife. So in such a circumstance, like any woman who would be in place of Rachel would rather want Stephen's wife to die. But Rachel, as I have said, that she is, she just appears like a saint-like figure. She's just like a saint-like figure who is so selfless that that she's not who is so selfless that she and her love for Stephen is so pure that it is out of her pure love for Stephen Blackpool that she takes care of his wife. And she also tries to assure Stephen, the way she tries to assure him that his wife would be all right, and tomorrow, the very next morning, she would be all right, she will come to her senses and everything. It simply projects her as a selfless woman and how compassionate she is. And it is this very nature of Rachel which makes readers understand why Stephen is in love with her. Any man, it is very natural for any man to fall in love with a woman like Rachel, who is so good, who does not have selfish interests at all. And it is her concern for Stephen, you know, it is her concern for Stephen that makes her take care of his wife till 3 in the morning. And in this chapter, Rachel's faith is also, revealed, because she trusts Stephen to such a degree, to such an extent, that she knows Stephen would never cause any harm to his wife, and she also knows that, and that he doesn't even, wish any harm for his wife, although he doesn't find any comfort in the presence of his wife. Still, it is her faith, it is her trust in Stephen that she knows that that he would never wish anything ill for his wife. So here we find that although Stephen does not wish anything ill, anything bad for his wife, still he wants to get rid of her. During that time period, during the Victorian era, as we know, that divorce could be afforded only by the wealthy people. And as far as Stephen Blackpool is concerned, it is not possible for him to afford that luxury. And the situation these people are stuck in, it seems to be inescapable. It seems that because of his impoverished state, he would never be able to come out of this quagmire. And as far as Rachel is concerned, she is also aware of it. She is also aware of the futility of the situation, that it becomes quite clear to her that their roads would never meet. Still, she makes every possible effort to calm Stephen's wife, because if she becomes calm and quiet, then only it would provide some comfort to Stephen, and it is only for the sake of Stephen's comfort that she tries her best to keep his wife calm and quiet. So what we understand from this chapter what we understand about Rachel from this chapter, that she is a selfless woman and her love for Stephen is selfless. Whatever she does for Stephen's wife, it is only out of her care, concern, and love for Stephen. And that is why I said that she is almost raised to the level of a saint. As a woman, she is simply raised to the level of a saint, because this kind of attitude or this kind of behavior is seen only in saints. Chapter 14 is titled as The Great Manufacturer, and here the title The Great Manufacturer refers to Mr. Gradgrind. In chapter 14, when we read chapter 14, we find that many years have passed. Sissy Jupe is now a young woman, and Mr. Gradgrind at present is a member of the parliament. A subtle change is seen in Mr. Gradgrind's attitude towards Sissy Jupe in this chapter. Earlier, when for the first time she was brought into his home, he thought that since Sissy has an imaginative nature, fanciful nature, she is emotional, it might have a bad influence on her children. But at present, when several years have passed and Sissy has been serving his family, with which he is very satisfied, his opinion about Sissy has changed. Although he is disappointed with Sissy as a student, because she has not been able to make much progress as a student, and so now here she is asked to leave the school. But Mr. Gradgrind, though he asks her to leave the school and advises her to be glad with her role as a service provider to his family, still he appreciates the value of her other traits, of her other virtues, qualities. Although he is disappointed with Sissy's progress as a student, but he is not blind to her, to the virtues that she has, to her inner goodness and affectionate nature. So as I said, that Mr. Gradgrind's attitude towards Sissy appears to be a little changed, for he no longer considers her emotional and imaginative nature to have a bad influence on his children, Tom and Louisa, which he used to think several years back. And he acknowledges her service to his family, and he hopes that she would be happy, she would be happy in continuing this role of hers. And we find that in this chapter, it is also seen that Mr. Gradgrind has, actually become fond of Sissy, but uh, he is, unable to understand her because she, does not fit into any easy category for him. Because as far as Mr. Gradgrind is concerned, we know that he is a man of facts, who completely relies on facts, who completely relies on logic, and therefore it is not possible for him. He is actually unable to understand Sissy's nature quite well. An important event is hinted at by Tom, because Tom here in this chapter informs Louisa that their father is going to spend the evening with Mr. Bounderby, and so they'll be talking about her future, and which hints at the upcoming marriage that will be taking place between Louisa and Mr. Bounderby. And here Tom is again, depicted as a manipulator, because Louisa, like among all the members in the family, Louisa loves her brother the most. And Tom is a manipulator. He has grown up to be a self-absorbed man who is only concerned with his self-interest. And that is why now we see that how he tries to, make use or encash Louisa's selfless love for him in order to benefit himself. Because now we know at present Tom no longer lives with Mr. Gradgrind in his house. Now he is serving as an apprentice to Bounderby, because Tom became very much fed up, he got very much, tired with his father's education. So he decided to leave home and serve Bounderby's house as an apprentice. So here we find that the upcoming marriage between Louisa and Mr. Bounderby is hinted at by Tom. And as I said, that he's also depicted as a manipulator, as a self-absorbed man, and which again shows how much, fruitless has been Mr. Gradgrind's utilitarian education, how utterly he has failed in, bringing up Tom as a moral individual. Chapter 15 is titled as Father and Daughter, because here a conversation takes place between Mr. Gradgrind and Louisa Gradgrind. And it is in this chapter that the proposal of Louisa's marriage with Bounderby is brought forth by Mr. Gradgrind. And when it is also significant, because when Louisa is informed about this marriage proposal, when she is told that Mr. Bounderby is interested in marrying her, she asks her father if she is expected to love him or not. And this, shocks actually. This shocks Mr. Gradgrind, because so long Mr. Gradgrind has been thinking that his children do not have any connection, do not have any relation with emotions. But when this question is asked by Louisa, it shocks him. And then she is asked by her father, like, to decide over the matter logically. She must not take into account emotions or sentiments, and she should keep aside all emotionality, sentimentality, and consider the decision, or try to look at the decision from a logical perspective. So, and moreover, she is also informed about the age difference that lies between them, between Bounderby and Gradgrind, and he also says that this won't be a problem for practical people like them, as because they are quite practical, so it won't be a hindrance to their happiness. So as I said, she is asked to make a decision may based on logic and facts and must not take into consideration emotions or sentiments at all. And this very advice given to her by Mr. Gradgrind would later, you know, uh, prove or would later prove him to be someone who would be entirely responsible for his daughter's miserable condition. As far as Louisa is concerned, we know that Louisa's upbringing has never allowed her to express her emotions. She can never express her emotions, her sentiments, and here too, in this case, in this very circumstance as well, we find how Louisa is unable to express her emotions, and therefore she accepts the proposal for the sake of her father's happiness, because she knows that if she agrees to marry Mr. Bounderby, it would make her father happy, although she does not have any love or affection for Mr. Bounderby. And since her childhood, Louisa has never been given the opportunity to interact with other people. She never got the opportunity to entertain others, okay, or to to come into contact with other men in her life. So marrying Bounderby neither excites her more nor less than any other options that she might have. So her education, her factual education, has completely driven out all emotions, all sentiments from her, and that is why she has a passive mind. She is so indifferent, and it is this upbringing or which is responsible for her passive attitude, and therefore it makes her consider the decision to be a logical one, and so she consents to marry Mr. Bounderby. Apart from this, she is also aware that if she marries Mr. Bounderby, she would be also able, to help protect her brother Tom from the consequences of his, vices, because she knows it very well that Tom is not on the right path, and therefore she feels that since Bounderby is a wealthy man, with the help of his wealth, or maybe utilizing his wealth, she will be able to protect her brother Tom from all dangers, from the consequences of his wrong actions. Here in this chapter, it is very significant. One thing which is very significant is that Louisa Gradgrind, despite having no love for Mr. Bounderby, marries him. So we can see that how Dickens tries to depict marriage here, that how again out of self-interest, how a marriage is completely based on self-interest. There is no true love at all in such a marriage. And later on we shall see how a marriage which is devoid of love, affection, care gives rise to extramarital relationships. Chapter 16 is titled as Husband and Wife because after the courtship between Mr. Bounderby and Louisa Gradgrind lasts for 8 weeks, they get married, and when this chapter begins, we find that Mr. Bounderby is a bit nervous because he doesn't know how to disclose, the reason, the news of his marriage to Louisa, and he was actually expecting from Mrs. Parsit a very emotional outburst, but Mrs. Parsit, on the other hand, surprises Mr. Bounderby by not reacting at all. She doesn't shed tears, and she doesn't even show any anger to this very news, and which actually, hurts his ego, Mr. Bounderbuy's ego, and he feels very disappointed and insulted at the same time, because he wanted Mrs. Parsi to react vehemently to this very news, because Mr. Bounderbuy's getting married to someone else means that she is no longer needed in his place as a housekeeper. So that is why he expected her to react vehemently. However, a separate arrangement is made for her by Mr. Bounderby, which is also accepted by Mrs. Sparsit. She is offered a position at the bank which will help her earn money and which will preserve her salary at the same time. And she is also provided with proper accommodations and domestic help. So on the after they get married, Mr. Bounderby and Louisa Gradgrind, in the very morning of his wedding day, while they were having their breakfast, Mr. Bounderby actually delivers a speech which rather appears to be a self-congratulatory kind of a speech, because this speech again reflects his boastful nature, how much he is proud of his social status, how much he is proud of his wealth. So in this very speech, he is kind of, he congratulates himself for having a young, beautiful wife, and at the same time, he considers Louisa to be very fortunate to have a husband who is wealthy and who enjoys a good social status. And later on, they go to honeymoon in France, where Mr. Bounderby, as we all know, that he is a man who believes in facts. Okay, although they go to a honeymoon, but still he goes there to see how factories run there. And here we find in this chapter that Tom also becomes, very grateful to Louisa for being such a good sister, because he knows that he would be able to encash his sister's soft corner, her soft feelings for her, towards her, towards him. So that's why he feels very grateful towards his sister. So as I said that this speech is very significant, that is delivered by Bounderby, because as I said, it reflects his pride and boastful nature, and it also shows that he considers Louisa to be very lucky to have a husband like him. And either way, if you look at, like, he not only considers himself lucky to have a wife, young, beautiful wife like Louisa, and at the same time, he also credits her for having a husband like him. And the speech that is delivered by Bounderby, shows again that he is completely a man devoid of sentiments, devoid of emotions, because when he delivers this speech, he doesn't talk about his love or affection or care for Louisa. Okay, because we know that generally people marry out of love. Yes, of course there are other reasons for which people marry, but love is the primary factor which drives a person to marry someone. But here again we see that utilitarian approach to life from Mr. Bounderby's speech. As far as Mrs. Parsit is concerned, she is very cunning. She's a very cunning woman, and she's aware of the huge age difference between Louisa and Bounderby, and from her own marital experience, she knows for sure that this marriage is not going to work because of this age difference between them, and she understands it immediately that this marriage is a mistake. At the same time, she knows that since Louisa has only factual knowledge and she lacks experience in her life, so she can never be as competent a housekeeper like Mrs. Sparseed. So from here we can understand Mrs. Sparseed's opinion about Louisa. However, it should be noted that this marriage between Mr. Bounderby and Louisa is not accepted by Mrs. Sparsit, and in the later chapters we shall find how Mrs. Sparsit, plays foul to destroy the relationship or between Bounderby and Louisa Gradgrind.